Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Community. I have a fan favorite here. I've got Ben. Hi, Ben.
Hey.
I love how we joke about this in our office that you're like a bit of a household name now on all the LinkedIn stuff, and now you're starting to become a household name on all the podcast stuff.
Yeah, just one step at a time.
What?
Yeah.
Soon you're going to be me. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so excited to chat because one of the things that we're going to talk about today is something that I feel like we get asked about a lot when it comes to our podcast launches and all the podcast clients that we work with. And then whenever people ask us about like growing a podcast, this is something that is so overlooked. And so I know when we were kind of preparing for this, we were talking about this, like that there's just so many angles on podcast SEO and like how people's podcasts can be found. Because I think one of the things that's such a benefit of podcasts that's so different than social is that it has a long life, like a long shelf life, if you use it properly, if you set it up properly. So we're going to talk about podcast SEO.
Yeah. I think this episode's going to be kind of for like two groups of people. It's like the people who are maybe thinking, I'm going to create a podcast potentially in the future, and I don't. My block on it is that I don't believe that it can ever be found or that I can ever actually build a following. That's like group one. And group two is you already have a podcast and you're putting out content that you believe is really impactful, and no one's finding it.
Yeah.
And I think that like we definitely have seen both groups of those people like in our own clients, and I think hopefully we can highlight a couple things here that we can kind of show you that, first of all, here's what we're doing to help our clients kind of like build something really special, but also here's how you could be doing it at home too. Because I think that there is a bit of a block on like, who's even going to listen to me talk about this podcast? And I think that like the people, they're out there.
Yeah.
It just might take a little bit of like finessing, I feel like, to find the right people. Yeah.
Well, I feel like it's like all social and all like internet things. It's like even with Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok, we're always like, who's going to want to watch me? Like who will we show up in stories? Like who's going to want to see me do this? Yeah. And so podcasting, I think, I don't know about you, but I definitely find a lot of people will say that it's like oversaturated. Like there's lots of like podcasts and like, but we're seeing podcasting be this growing industry where it's like becoming even like more successful for ad partners. Like, you know, people are downloading like our podcast from 3 years ago. Like I'm still getting downloads. So I think it's really important to remember that even though podcasting is a little bit of a long game, there's things that you can do to quicken it, of course. But at the same time, like I think setting up some of these like key things early is important, because I think a lot of people, they'll podcast and then they'll just like put stuff out and they might not advertise it, or it doesn't have like great keywords, or they haven't titled it well, or and all of those things like really do make such a big impact. And then they're like, why isn't anyone finding it? And then it feels like, you know, such like a loss because you're spending so much time on it, or maybe production dollars or whatever. So I think it's really about optimizing as much as you can.
Yeah, and the good news is that if you do have podcast episodes that you feel like were kind of a bust, you can actually go back and fix a couple of the things that we're going to be talking about today too. So it's not over, because podcasting can be that kind of like evergreen content that exists in Google. Because basically one of the first things that I wanted to say was that like podcast SEO, some people like kind of use that as like what's your podcast SEO strategy? Like podcast SEO is just Google SEO, right? And I think that like it's important that when we're thinking about certain things, like even to an extent an Instagram post, but specifically if you're thinking of like a blog or a podcast, like it's don't necessarily think about what am I doing just internally on it, but like how is this going to show up on Google? Because that's like simply like where a lot of new people are going to be searching for you. And even if they're not in the Google bar themselves, like they could actually be using like the similar features on Instagram and on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because all these platforms are slowly moving towards more of like a Google mentality on searching things. So it's like the first thing that we need to know is like that you need to optimize your podcast for basically Google search. So like the first question is like almost like, is your podcast like positioned that someone would actually search for it, or are you kind of like trying to answer a question that nobody's asking? And I think that's like where a lot of people even like start right off the bat, where they're kind of missing out on that.
Yeah. Well, I think we've seen great growth with our podcast this year. Like, definitely, I wish I had collected the numbers in advance of, like, you know, percentage wise, but like definitely a big growth. And I think a big piece of that is that we've actually gotten so much clearer on one, like, you know, titles and positioning, but two, what our audience actually responds to. And because before it would be kind of like, I'd be like, oh, I have this idea. Like, I'm just going to talk about this. Or like, I want to interview this guest. Or I'd meet somebody and they'd want to be on the podcast. And I wasn't 100% sure that it was aligned, but I did it anyway. And then we would see the numbers suffer because of it. And then now we're so much more clear where it's like, we know like tactical episodes, like people want to learn from like the things that we're doing every day with clients. So of course I still like to talk about mindset stuff. Those episodes do pretty well and like all of that. But I think when we're really clear on like, this is how we grew our LinkedIn in 2024. Like this is how to use a trial reel. Like this is how to do. We just did an Instagram broadcast channel one. Like we find that people are more interested in it, and I bet a big piece of that is that these are actually people who probably aren't even in our network, but they're searching for answers elsewhere.
Yeah, so that's basically like point number one. Is if you grab from that is start with the title. And that's again a huge shift is now like going into even some of your guest episodes. You're like, here's like generally what I want to talk about with this person. And we're already thinking about like, how are we going to position this episode ideally so that we're actually answering a question that that our audience is asking. Or like when we do our team content days, we come with like, these are like, we're not just going to record a podcast. We're going to answer a question that we feel like that our audience is really needing right now. So like sometimes we send out like a poll on our weekly newsletter. That's something we recently started doing, or in our broadcast channel on Instagram, or we'll ask our social business club members, being like, "Hey, like what's something that you guys are curious about?" Or if we don't even always need to ask the question because people are actually coming to us. Clients are asking us in discovery calls, like, "I don't get this part of your package," or "I don't know how to make sense of this on Instagram." And it's like, oh, like if we're being asked these questions, especially if we're being asked them more than once, that probably is already a podcast topic. And that podcast topic is going to likely outperform the idea that you had in your head or the question that you were asking, because your clients aren't probably asking the same questions as you. Your clients are probably asking questions that you were asking 6 months ago, 2 years ago. Like they're like one to 3 steps behind you. So you need to stop kind of asking your questions and start looking for your clients' questions. And that's probably your title. And if it's not your title, or if it's not clear in your title, then you're missing out on it. Because I still see so many of these kind of like, and we've been here, but like from, the basement to the boardroom kind of thing. It's like no one's Googling that. Like simply like I'm not going on being like, oh, like, please help me get to the boardroom.
100%.
But I might ask like, oh, what are like 3 tips for growing my Instagram profile in 2025. Or
like how to scale to 7 figures.
Or like how to navigate short-term rental agreements on stuff like that. Like you might think that's like, oh, that's too niche of a title. But like the more niche the title, the better, because someone's not even going to look at it and they're going to like be like, I actually am going to listen to that whole episode because I actually have that question. Or I don't even want to press play and then log off of it, because like if someone doesn't like your topic anyways, once they start it, they're not going to finish the episode anyways.
Totally.
You might as well just be upfront about it and not go for the bait and switch, and just be really clear about it. Actually, specifically, I made this episode for this person, and so like that resonates with the viewer. They're going to be like, this is actually made for me. I'd be remiss to miss this episode that was curated for my experience, rather than like being like, oh, this applies to every entrepreneur or every business owner ever. Like, it's like, that's not going to really resonate as much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And even the other day I was like searching on Apple Podcasts for like because I was like, oh, I should listen to some podcast owners of like, or podcast hosts who sold agencies. And I was like, oh, I'm curious. And I went and I downloaded this guy who he sold a number of agencies, and he had all these like kind of frameworks. And I started listening to the podcast. I didn't like the podcast. Like I actually wasn't like into it, but I was like, oh, he kind of got me like with the titles. Like, cause I was like, yeah, you're right. Like it just, I didn't love the content, but I was like, okay, like this is an interesting way. And it actually showed me like some consumer behavior. And even when, you know, you did the prep notes for this, you put an example here, like one, like someone, and I've been guilty of this, and you know, this is actually something we used to laugh at, like with the podcast originally, because it would always be like, I can't remember what the title was, but there was always like a title, and it was like was it lessons? There's something that I would like always do, and I was like, this actually doesn't say anything, but it's like one option could be episode 15, my thoughts on marketing. Or you could do marketing mistakes you're making and how to fix them, right? Like what sounds more appealing? What would someone actually look up? So keeping it clear, and if you don't know keywords in your business, that's actually going to be really helpful for you in all areas, whether that be podcasting, social, YouTube, email marketing, like whatever. Like you need to know like what people are searching for. There's a great website. It's called Ask the Public. That can help with some of that. But ChatGPT can help. I know you use some SEO tools. But if you don't know keywords for your business, it's so important.
Yeah, and like I think that this is like, you might be like, oh, is this like the place to start, like to get clarity on my SEO, like my SEO or my keywords? Like I actually would argue like surprisingly yes, because like if you are using a podcast for like kind of like a top-down funnel for your content, it's like we're gonna start with this long-form podcast and then we're gonna break it into a blog and we're breaking it into the reels. If you didn't start with a question that people are actually asking, and you don't start with keywords that are actually aligned to like the offering that you're ultimately trying to push, or the membership or the coaching like funnel, like you're just gonna get further away from like what's actually tying all your like marketing elements together. So if you do choose podcast as like your top-down funnel, or maybe it's a blog, or maybe it's something else, like that is kind of where you need to be getting really crystal clear on like actually what are people asking me, what am I trying to answer, or what am I trying to be like a thought leader on. And I also want to go back to like the example that you just talked about there, which is like the episode 115 thing. I put that in there specifically because a fun fact is I think that it's a waste of time to typically put your guest's name or your episode number in your title, partly because your guest name can go in the show notes, and your episode number can go like elsewhere on the distribution platform. Those things have other places for search, but like the title is actually the most important SEO space for a podcast, because that is like the top, H1 level header that comes up on Google. That's going to come up like when they're looking in Spotify. So if you're wasting like your first like 4 words of your title should be like the gut punch, like this is exactly what it's like, and someone should feel like called out by that. To listen to that, because so if you're using it on episode 115 with some, probably a great guest, but like frankly not a household name. Like that's not going to speak to somebody who's new to your world. I'm sure you can get the people who are already following your thing who might even know this guest because you guys are in kind of similar warm networks. Like that's awesome. But if you want new listeners, if you want to build a following, that information can go elsewhere, and you need to be really answering the question, putting it out in big red letters. Like this is like what I'm answering for in this question. Like you have a question about how to grow a podcast, like 4 tips to grow a podcast, or answering questions that all podcasters have, like stuff like that. Something that like is actually going to speak to what they're Googling. So
yeah, we actually had a situation last week maybe where we have a client who's pretty high profile, and they were interviewing like a household name, like somebody, like it's a household name. And that was one where we were kind of like, that might make sense actually for you to use their name, like for clout, like 100%. But I totally agree. And I think it's so easy sometimes for us to, just want to be like, oh, we're going to profile them. But like, if you are putting their name in the show notes, they'll get found. And like, I even think about this with like Lori and Chris. I remember when I was starting to kind of get into them, I would like kind of look to see like where else they would be. Right. And you would find them. Like you just put in Lori, like you'll find a bunch of episodes there. So I think that's so important that you like brought that up, because I think sometimes with titles, it's kind of like even on websites and on Instagram, we see that like people waste like really valuable space. With things like names or like numbers and stuff like that, when like no one's like, oh, I wonder what episode 230 was. Like, like people aren't really looking that up.
Yeah, totally. And so I think my rule of thumb there would be, just to make it really clear, is if the person that's on your podcast, if you can't type their first and last name into Google and they're the first 5 options, then I would say they're definitely below like the household name status, and you should reconsider. Like the guest you're talking about, if you typed in their first name, they probably would have been the first option, let alone their first and their last. So I would say for most people, probably stick that in the show notes with the rest of their links and stuff like that. But,
no, I love that. Okay, Ben, tell us about tags.
So tags are just another feature I kind of wanted to call out, because most distribution platforms have it. So like if you use like Spotify for podcasters, like the creator site, you can add tags. Or if you use like a backend site, so like our clients use Buzzsprout, so like that one is like has like a lot of capacity for using tags. But basically tags are like back end words that you're adding to kind of embed in your podcast. Think of it kind of like hashtags, although hashtags are kind of on the decline on the Instagram side, but like tags and keywords are still like pretty important for Google, and it's kind of an opportunity for you to reinforce and make it more clear for the podcast apps and for Google, like what keywords are you kind of doubling down on. So it's like if in your title you say like this is for brick and mortar like solopreneurs or something like that, like you want to repeat those words in your tags and really reinforce like what kind of like topics am I answering for? What do I want to keep showing up on? So like typically on like the community podcast, we want to keep showing up for like podcasters, podcast hosts, social media tips, like scaling a business, like community-minded business, like these kind of like words, you can kind of see like we talk about those words. Those words are often in our titles and in our show notes. Like, so we're going to reinforce those with the tags. So yeah, again, similar to hashtags, but it's basically like for Google. And I think that a lot of people just like aren't using that feature on a lot of things. And I would just recommend it's there. Take advantage of it because it's kind of like an easy thing to do just to kind of have another extra win and help yourself like hopefully rank on Google.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. We've seen that before too, where I remember when we first started using tags and then the other one that we, on Buzzsprout, we actually used to do a lot of blogs. We don't do that as much anymore. But we used to do a lot of blogs, and I would notice when we actually put a tag in and blogs, we would get like an up of episode downloads. So it's like, it does work. Curious for you, and this is kind of like our last like piece of this, is like podcast categories, because I think this is something that, we've talked about quite a bit because we help our clients choose their podcast categories when they launch. And it's interesting because we're actually like kind of changing our way of doing this, I think, like, because before we'd kind of be like, you let us know what categories like you think would be good. And then we were kind of like, oh, like people aren't choosing like the right categories for themselves or categories that they might rank in or whatever. So yeah, tell me about categories.
Yeah, so basically, again, like the major podcast apps like Spotify, Apple, like Podbean, like all the
heavy hitters,
the lesser ones from there. They all have like categories that you can. Generally, they're all the same, but you can basically select up to 3 categories for your podcast to be ranked in. That kind of helps you to rank in like the charts for those specific categories. It helps again, just like searchers on the specific podcast apps. So this part's less about Google, and this is more about specifically in the podcast apps where people might be looking for. I'm on Apple and I want a podcast about like small business, social media. We want to be then having the podcast categories of like social media, business, entrepreneurship, and kind of like get as specific as possible within like the range of like what they allow you to do, and to kind of like be like, what kind of like fields, what industries do I want to be seen in? Again, that's just kind of another way to differentiate yourself on the back end. So the tags and the categories are kind of work in the back end for you. And then the titles and the description really set the stage for like your own copy, and kind of on the front end, what are people actually going to be reading? They're not really going to read the categories or the tags. That's kind of more information for Google and for Apple and for Spotify, and then information for your ideal client to actually make the choice to listen to, take advice from you, to work with you. That's actually through the title. Firstly, I would stress that is super important, and then the description. And we were actually talking about how the copy from that like really can like kind of again stem to like everything you do kind of thing. So I would really like spend the time even like asking questions about like how do I even want to format my show notes, like what kind of like for someone to read, like how could I even then maybe even repurpose this too and make this a content play for my like Instagram or for my Pinterest, and like feel so good about the copy on the front end and do the work on the back end so that you can actually kind of repurpose things and get good results, because you have like the keywords in place and you kind of know what you're actually trying to accomplish and who you're trying to reach. Because if your answer is I'm trying to reach everybody, you won't.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's even with podcasting in particular. Like, to be honest, our most successful podcasts are pretty niche.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I think occasionally we'll do one where I'm kind of like, maybe there's only 4 people, like the 4 people who asked us the question, maybe there's only 4 people that are asking that question, but like it's not typically true.
Yeah.
There's typically more people than you think, and I think that when we get kind of we kind of get that self-doubt of, will anyone listen to this if we make it more niche? I typically think that like it's good to push past that and really put out like the most niche version that you can.
Yeah.
And 'cause I think that usually pays off.
Totally.
Yeah.
We've seen reap the rewards of that. Why do you think it's important or not important? And maybe this is like just a hot take, for people to rank.
I think that people look at the top charts, and I mean, you look at the top
Every
charts.
day.
If someone's in the top charts, Kristina knows it.
I know it, and I tell them.
Even
if they're not our clients, if I like vaguely know them.
Yeah.
Like there's this guy I've met like one time, and he just launched a podcast, and he was so excited. He was like number 200 or something, and then but in Canada he was like number 75.
Yeah.
And so I like sent him the screenshot, and I was like, here, I saw you in the top charts, and he was like so excited. He posted, he's like, look at me like sweeping the nation in Canada. Like it was funny, but it's just like I just think there's something so cool about that, and I know a lot of people. I know I asked you this question. I'm answering it, but I know a lot of people. Sometimes I'll be like, "Hey, like you're number 175. Like this is awesome." And they're like, "Is that even something to celebrate?" And I'm like, "Of all podcasts in the world, being number 175, yeah,
it's not bad. It's giving you a boost for sure." And I mean, like truthfully, like I don't like. If you rank a lot, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're like gonna start turning a crazy profit on your podcast or anything like that. But like I do think that like people are seeing that, and it is something to celebrate and kind of a motivator to yourself to like kind of see like, man, like I'm actually consistently getting more downloads on my episode release day, and I'm seeing that by being in the top part. It's a good measuring stick for yourself to be like, where am I at? Am I actually moving this forward? Did I have a week where I didn't rank? And like that's probably because like I was not really like optimizing what I was posting, or I didn't really ask a good question that week, or maybe that guest actually wasn't like that aligned, and that's actually information. So like it's great, it's information, and I hope that it serves as an encouragement to everyone that's in the top, because it should be. It's really exciting. But then the other side of it, that is, I do think it's important just from a standpoint of it does give you information about your discoverability, but also like it can help you, secure sponsorship and all that kind of stuff as well. So that's where I would be doing it. And if you are in the top charts, screenshot that. Ask Kristina will tell you, and just so you have the receipts.
I actually typed something into my Google Photos the other day, and it brought up like thousands of people's like screenshots of all of their like top charts. I was like, I should make somebody a collage. Stacey Millard mostly. But no, and I think too, one of the things that helps people get in the top charts, just so you guys know, and this is from a friend of mine who is a pretty reputable podcaster. A big part of it is new downloads. So not just like, hey, like you have a really consistent, loyal like group of people who listen every week. It's like, how do you get new people to click that button, right? And there's like, and maybe we can do an episode on that sometime. I'd love to have you back on the show. But like how do you get new people to listen to what you're up to, what you're saying? And like we saw, like I think I was like number like 35 or something in entrepreneurship. 35 maybe 40 after High Vibe Women. And it was because I met so many new people. I did a live podcast episode. I encourage people to download. I always see a spike after speaking. Like, if I'm on a reputable, I was on Earn Your Happy, like on Lori Harder's podcast, saw a spike after that, right? So like there's things you can do that kind of help with that. But I love seeing our clients and friends and partners in the top 200 because, podcasting can feel so like laborious and like so much work. And even like those little wins, like celebrate that.
Yeah, I actually love the High Vibe Woman example because I had a bit of a block on this. I feel like where it's like we occasionally on the community podcast, like we will like talk about like a High Vibe Woman event or like you and Jeanette run like these like amazing retreats. But I'm looking at these being like those amazing retreats are like for like usually like 10 to 20 women, or High Vibe Woman is for like 100 to 200 people kind of max. And I'm like, that's not enough because like if I didn't want to go to High Vibe Woman, I'm not like that likely to listen to that podcast. But again, that's a kind of a block on like we think that something's too niche, but it's like people actually that missed that event wanted to listen to that podcast, and people who were at that event but then weren't regular listeners of the podcast like got to kind of join our community that way. And like I think that again, podcasting isn't about reaching everybody. It's about like singling out like who your people are. And that podcast actually did pretty well because it was very explicitly High Vibe Women. We could have said entrepreneurship events, and it's like no, like this that was targeted to bring in people from High Vibe Women to like see what else we're up to at the Social Snippet and at High Vibe Women with the community podcast. And it's like I think even for myself that was too niche, and again I was proven wrong. And I think that if you're thinking about how do you actually find your people? Like, use the words that your people are looking for.
Yeah.
If you want to bring people in from an event, like use that event. Like nothing actually is too niche. Yeah, as long as you're kind of like utilizing that kind of SEO space for something that your people would actually be searching for or actually be looking for. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. Well, I was going to say too, and this is like, maybe this is my last hot take on this, but something that we did, and this episode had performed so well, and I didn't know if it would, but something that like we are kind of leaning into is being a little bit more controversial.
Yeah.
And that's something I've always been so against, like, because I'm like, you know, a little like soft-hearted little chickie. So like I'm always like scared and I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I did an episode right after High Vibe Women that was like, if you want to speak at events, like this is what we're looking for. And I made it very clear. I'm like, this is what we look for at High Vibe Women. This is probably why you haven't been chosen. Like blah, 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 blah. And the like download numbers high. Ranking high, comments, shares high, because like I took a stance that was pretty clear.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like sometimes when we're podcasting, we want to keep it like really vague and we want to keep things like really. But I think like the message here that I'm really hearing is like that specificity. Thank you. Is actually like what people are looking for.
Yeah.
And are looking for that insight.
Yeah, totally. And I think that we see this in like in business in general, where it's like you're worried about kind of like, how do I work? How do I make it so everyone can work with me? How do I make it so I appeal to everybody? But it's like if you don't speak really clearly to one group, you probably won't get the other group anyways. Yeah. So it's like you might as well like really speak to the people who you want in your world. And like in our world, we want people who like take this constructive criticism for like, the High Vibe Woman feedback. We want people who actually were like, that episode was about how like you need to be in the room and you actually need to invest in people, and then those make the best speakers. Yeah. And like we want people with that energy, like working with us, listening to us. We think that those people, the people who are, you know, like are teachable, are like community minded. Those are the people who get the most out of the community podcast anyways, and are most likely to be, you know, repeat listeners, all that kind of stuff. So it's like there's no point us trying to get, you know, the hustle and grind. I'm just trying to like knock off as many speaking engagements as I possibly can in 2025. Like that person probably wouldn't like a lot of our messages anyways. So it's like why bother kind of thing. Like let's like get specific towards people who actually, could learn from us kind of thing. So, yeah.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, any last thoughts about podcast SEO?
Podcast SEO like is Google SEO, and if you don't view your podcast as something that's to be searched, then it probably won't get searched for. So that's kind of in general what we're trying to talk about here is like don't make something that nobody wants. And,
Amen.
And the easiest way to do that is to really start backwards and be like, oh, what question can I answer? What can I title this podcast? And how can I then record it in a way that actually adds the most value to people that are actually in my world or that I think would really benefit from being in my world. So yeah, start with the title, work backwards.
Love it.
Build something people want.
Yeah. I know you have to listen to, if you haven't listened to this episode, Maria and I did like a create winning offers episode.
Good episode.
It's a good, we'll link it in the show notes because it's a good one because sometimes we create things and people don't want them. And even if we want them, that doesn't mean anything. So Ben, thanks so much. This was so good. Yeah. And I think, I think more podcast related episodes for us to come. Whatever you folks want to hear from me and Ben. Ben is like our little marketing maven. He's been doing all of the behind the scenes for like basically everything for our podcast and for our social. So we've been learning lots and lots of lessons. But so if you have any questions or if you're like, hey, I'm like, you know, want to grow this part of my business or on like marketing wise, we want to talk about it. So I'll bring Ben back.
Let's do it.
You can connect with Ben on LinkedIn and that's basically the only place.
Yeah. Otherwise you can just Google me.
Are you a top 5 household name?
No. If I'm on your podcast, you'll notice when I'm on the podcast, I don't typically include my name in the title because that's not that helpful for SEO.
Not Beyonce here. No. Thanks, Ben. And let us know what resonates with you folks and what you're going to try.